Hello, everybody. Welcome to another podcast. My guest today is John Vervaeke, who is a professor at the University of Toronto, and I'm very excited to speak with him. He's done a lot of work related to meaning and wisdom, and we're going to talk about those things and also psilocybin mushrooms. He teaches things like cognitive psychology, cognitive science, among other things at the university. So,
right.
John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Not cash, stealing money from the poor's a bit rash. Line your pockets, fill your tanks with your rockets. Look at it, we just can't stop it. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Just don't become late. That's the only rule. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. All been going on way too long.
One of the ways I like to get these types of conversations going is kind of defining the terms we're kind of referring to and talking about. So I thought a good place to start is maybe just talking about, if you could explain what we're talking about when we're talking about wisdom and what is meaning. What does it mean to have meaning?
Sure. Okay. I'll try my best.
Yeah.
I have entire talks on each of these, so I'll try and keep it.
Yeah.
And then
I thought we could go from there into sort of how psilocybin might come into play when talking about those things.
Totally.
Cool. Okay. So what is wisdom to you? How do you define wisdom?
So I think the best way of doing it is to, first of all, start with a contrast with knowledge and the kind of knowledge we're familiar with, scientific knowledge. So knowledge is largely about overcoming ignorance, and what you do is you amass evidence and that you help to establish certain beliefs, certain structures of beliefs. So a theory is a prototypical example. Whereas wisdom is not so much about overcoming ignorance. Wisdom is about overcoming self-deception, the way in which we deceive ourselves, fall into self-deceptive, self-destructive, self-defeating patterns of cognition and behavior. And therefore, it's not so much about getting evidence about your beliefs, because a lot of what goes on in self-deception isn't really at the level of your beliefs, even your unconscious beliefs. It's at sort of deeper levels of processing. And so wisdom is much more about altering the relevance of the information, what significance you attach to it, how important it is to you, and therefore what's salient, what stands out to you, what motivates and draws your attention. So wisdom is a lot more about your attentional connectedness to the world, your sense of identification, the identities you're sort of assuming, the identities you're assigning, and it's about bringing a kind of flexibility and awareness in that. So I would say at the core of wisdom, I'm not saying wisdom reduces to this, but at the core of wisdom is our capacity for insight. You know those moments when you've been struggling with a problem and you can't, and you just can't solve the problem, and then you get aha, and you realize, oh, the reason I can't solve it is I've just misframing this problem. And you alter the information's relevance and salience. You alter what you're paying attention to, and you get insight. It's notice we use a visual, attentional metaphor, and that changes. Now that's an individual insight. Now, if you were to have think of wisdom as much more like a systematic sets of insights. Like many of your errors are just ad hoc; they're random. But there's patterns. You also have patterns of errors, and you know the difference in your own life. You know that there's things you do over and over again. Right? So there's systematic errors, and so when you get an insight into these, you don't just change one problem; it's the whole system of problems.
Right.
And wisdom is that kind of systematic insight that fundamentally affords you improving your capacities for overcoming self-deception and sort of seeing through that kind of illusion, so you get a better kind of connectedness to the world.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's one. It's similar. When I think about wisdom, I think about these ideas that you can make changes to things like your patterns and things that carry over to different areas, so that having a wisdom is kind of like you can live by like certain codes or something that carry over to maybe your social life, your work life, your study life and things.
So wisdom is it's not like knowledge, it's much more like rationality, where rationality isn't like a set of beliefs. Rationality is like, use your idea. It's like a code of how you improve your cognition that you apply in many different areas. So when we say that somebody's rational, we're not describing a set of beliefs we have. We're describing sort of a domain general way they behave.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. How they're using the knowledge that they gain.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
It also sounds like the way you're framing it too sounds like meaning is kind of very connected to wisdom then, because we're honing in on what we should be focusing on, kind of.
Right. So, I mean, the meaning I'm interested in is when people talk about existential meaning.
Mm.
So we're using meaning as a metaphor, like our lives aren't sentences, right?
Mm.
So we're trying to pick up on this kind of idea that our lives make sense to us. The pieces fit together, but notice what my sentences are doing. It's not only that the words fit together and make sense, they're connecting you and I together.
Right.
They're allowing us, right? And so what you're looking for in meaning is a kind of a making sense, right, that is connecting you to reality. So it's sort of three fundamental connections. The way you're connected to yourself, the way you're connected to other people, like you and I are now, right? And the way you sense you're connected to reality. And so if you have sort of this sense of, inner peace, that sounds so trite. What I mean by that is that, like, a lot of our self-deception is driven by internal conflict. And when that internal conflict is resolved to certain degrees, right, that affords, right, you seeing more correctly into other people's states of mind, you get better connected to them, you get better in touch with the world. And it's that sense of connectedness, belonging to other people, belonging to the world. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about meaning.
So it seems like one of the things, so does meaning inherently imply then some kind of relationship? Like meaning is not...
In fact, that's what I would say. In fact, I have to use the word religio for this. And I'm picking up on how it resonates with it's one of the potential etymological origins for religion. I'm not saying it's religion, but it's the way that because it means bondedness, connectedness, sense of being well fitted to things and things making sense, and you being in community with other people and with the world and with yourself.
Right. That's interesting.
And we seek for it. In fact, meaning in life is a very, very powerful motivator. It's predictive of all kinds of aspects of your well-being. And when meaning in life goes down, you suffer in a multitude of important ways. And one of the things, I mean, this is work I do with Christopher Mastropietro and Philip Misevich on one of the books we've just published, and some of the works I'm doing with some of my RAs and stuff, is that, right, we're in sort of a meaning crisis in the West.
Right.
We've lost a lot of institutions that help us cultivate those states and practices and traits that enhance that sense of meaning, give us a place where we can practice cultivating wisdom.
Yeah, I've heard you mention that in some of your other talks, that you're saying that we all know where to get information. You go to the internet, you learn about anything you want. You go learn how to build a boat, how to go white river rafting, and do whatever you want. But when it comes to like where we find wisdom, people kind of draw blanks, and it's not as talked about, not as shared in our cultures right now.
Right. And so when I started talking about this stuff at the university in '97, other people had started talking about it. It was like there was a couple of anthologies. There was some people, the Berlin Paradigm, Monica Ardelt, were starting to do some really great work on this. But since then, it's really expanded. And also the psychology and the cognitive science of meaning in life these are both expanding.
It's true. Right? Yeah. People are definitely drawn to these ideas, and maybe that's because it's been some like a deficiency sort of in our culture. So right now, people are very into these ideas, like cultivating meaning in their lives.
Right, and I think for the reason why it's problematic for a lot of people is a lot of people, I would include myself in this, we're post-religious, right? We don't returning to the established religions. Right. I mean, I do a lot of practices derived from Buddhism and Taoism, but ensconcing myself within one of the established religions just doesn't seem a viable option.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, but like in the 20th century, we've tried secular alternatives. We've tried these all-encompassing ideologies like fascism, Nazism, and communism, and they've drenched the world with blood. So what we've done is we're sort of traumatized. We can't go back, and it looks can't go forward, and so we're sort of left. And and I'm a scientist and I'm a teacher, and being an autodidact, being a self-teacher, that's not a good thing, right? And what we've done is we've thrown people into these traumatized little, places where they're sort of autodidacts of wisdom. And,
right.
Sometimes that goes well.
Trying to
But
figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an
So,
interesting point. That's a really good idea. I like that idea. And I feel that from a lot of people I talk to, just that like they're so anti-religion. They're not only not into religion, they think
yeah,
it's like the devil. They do not want anything to do with it. They've been sort of, you could say, traumatized or something. They've been just put off
yes.
of it so much, and now, but they're looking for, like the word spirituality comes up a lot these days because they're
There it is.
seeking those things.
Yeah. Because people need self-transcendence. They need to cultivate wisdom. They need reliable ways of enhancing this connection we're talking about, this meaning in life. We know that they need to get into the flow states. They need to know which are the good altered states of consciousness, which
Right.
are the best ones. Like they need these are really important needs, and yet there isn't anywhere they can turn. So there's a hunger, but it's like I'm saying, it's coupled to this fear. They also, a lot of these people, they've given up on, the political world, right? Because I know the stats on, people are feeling
Right.
increasing.
Yeah, definitely.
So the political alternatives that we tried in the 20th century are also being rejected by people. People are deeply cynical
Yeah.
and bitter about those. So they're not only hating religion, they're hating the secular alternatives of politics, right? And so it's right.
Yeah, that reminds me of what you said earlier. I was going to ask you about, and I don't remember exactly how you put it, but just that we're the sort of way we're lying to ourselves, and that maybe we're also seeing that around us, and people are becoming cynical, like you said, whereas they feel like there's not a lot of meaning because there's a lot of bullshit out there. There's a lot of stuff coming at us.
I talk about this a lot, and I mean, and I think that's another. So we've been talking about sort of our individual needs, for which there's this mounting cultural need that is consonant with the meaning crisis, which is, as you mentioned, this rise in bullshit. And I mean, it's been 20 years now since Frankfurt wrote that really important book on bullshit, and the whole idea of what it is, and the fact that it's people. Yeah, we talked about this in our most recent book, like the sense that bullshit is just increasing and overwhelming and becoming prevalent.
Yeah,
I think that's very important. And one of the things, I mean, we maybe talk about it later, but I think one of the things that wisdom does is it helps you see through bullshit.
Yeah.
It's that kind of incisive insight, that systematic seeing through illusion and the way salience can be manipulated and distracted. I think that's important also.
Right. And maybe this is where we can sort of bring the talk about psilocybin mushrooms into the discussion. Is it seems like under these types of states, those are some of the conclusions people come to a lot. They start cutting through a lot of the bullshit patterns in their life, things they've been doing they don't like, but they don't know why they do them.
So I think of it as, so I'm a scientist, so I'll think of it as like, here's the distribution. Here's a whole bunch of people that are getting into these altered states of consciousness, and then within there's different groups that have different kinds of experiences. And as you mentioned, I'm interested in because when you do experiments, like when you give people like at the Griffiths Lab psilocybin, you get different subgroups have different responses, right? Well, pretty reliably. I'm interested in that subgroup that reliably has these kinds of insights, mystical experiences, transformative experiences. I'm very interested when people via psychedelic intervention or other forms of, because people use other things. They use fasting, other disruptive strategies, like all of these disruptive strategies. I'm interested when people get into these sort of higher states of consciousness in which they feel challenged and empowered to sort of fundamentally change their self and their life. I find that like really, really important and interesting.
Yeah, that is fast. And that's really what draws me to talking about this stuff. And I would say what I've sort of learned, and some of the studies have shown this, I think, that it's when they're using psilocybin to maybe treat things that people struggle with, like depression, anxiety, these type of things, it's when those people have these mystical, profound experiences that leads to them fixing a lot of these issues, it seems. It's related.
Yes. So, and I think, so there's a couple things to say to this, and you might want to have Mark Helburn on at some time, because, but broadly speaking, the therapeutic benefits of the psychedelics seem to be dependent on, mediated, work through the spirituality of the experience. The more spiritual, you broadly construe. Notice what I'm doing right here. right. The more it has to do with this connectedness we're talking about,
Yeah.
and this insightfulness, right? This making sense, right? Not theoretically, but like we're talking about in terms of wisdom, right? That's what is predictive of how effective the psychedelic is for therapeutic intervention. So it's really like, if we want these things to be transformative, we shouldn't think of it just as the drug, right? It's really, it's the old stuff. It's the set, it's the setting, but there's a third S that should be answered. It's the spirituality. It's set and setting and spirituality that really matter for how transformative and liberating these experiences can be for people.
Yeah. And that's something like, I'm sure you've probably looked at this aspect of it. What's been studied around something like psilocybin is how it affects the brain, and how what it seems to be doing is like opening sort of the floodgates. It's like connecting parts of the brain that generally aren't connected, maybe removing something that's blocks ideas or limits ideas.
So what you're getting is you're getting a shift in sort of a more global form of functional connectivity. The connectivity is important because it means areas are talking to each other that aren't usually talking to each other. But it's not just the connectivity that's important; it's also the kind of firing. Carhart Harris talks about you get into a state like criticality. There was a recent 2018, who's it by? I think it's by Lauderdale, that you get into a state called metastability. So metastability is, so normally your brain is, and this also is related to areas talking to each other. I'll try to put the two ideas together as briefly as I can. So normally the brain is sort of segregating processes from each other because you need to pull things apart. If I take off my glasses, everything blurs. That's not good, right? I need to pull things apart. If I just let everything blur into an homogeneous blob, that's not great, right? But right, so the brain is often segregating things, but sometimes the brain is integrating things together. Now you can get into a state called metastability where the brain is doing the two at the same time, where it's both integrating and segregating at the same time. And so what that does is that what it does, and this is what I think in cognitive terms is so important about these things, right? So if you move up from the brain level to what's the processing doing, I think it's doing two things. One thing we can talk about is it's introducing noise into the system, and that actually turns out to be really important for sort of opening up the number of states your brain can get into. We can talk about that in a minute. But related to that is that metastability and that criticality means you have enhanced cognitive flexibility. So think about, again, we talked about you're in that problem, you can't, right? Now, if you don't have a lot of flexibility, right? You stay locked. But if you can enhance your cognitive flexibility, you go, and open it.
That's really interesting. You know, that reminds me of what I've heard a lot about lately is people saying like Silicon Valley coming up with all these new ideas. They're very into like microdosing and using psilocybin and LSD to problem solve.
Yes. So, I mean, the thing that's the thing about Silicon Valley is, yes, there's good evidence, and we're trying to set up such at my lab here a microdosing study.
Really? Oh, cool.
Good evidence. Yeah. It's a shell game, right? Because you got to get everybody to believe that everybody else has already agreed, like that the university is agreed. Like it's like,
yeah. Everyone's afraid to just put their neck out there,
right? Everybody and so what I'm telling you is in no way official, but informally, right? When we're talking to all these people, everybody says we'll do it if those people agree, and so everybody else. So there's a lot that's going on around microdosing, but what I would say is, given what we were just saying a few minutes ago, Silicon Valley is sort of getting only half the picture. They could really, really improve what was going on. Like there's increasing evidence, like if you train people in mindfulness practices, which also independently enhance cognitive flexibility and insight, and also reduce your proclivity to self-deception. If you were to integrate that with microdosing, right, and then if you were to integrate that into a community where people could sort of talk and share, it would massively improve.
Interesting.
Right? The cognitive benefits.
I want to touch on a couple of those things. I do want to touch on that self-deception idea. And what do you mean when you're referring to people being self-deceptive?
So what I mean, so let's go back. Here's a good way of doing it, because we talked about bullshit a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's use that as our way of getting into this discussion about self-deception. So we have a common metaphor for self-deception that's actually very misleading. It's kind of self-deceptive as a metaphor, which is we often talk about self-deception as if you're lying to yourself. You see, now when I lie to you, I manipulate your behavior by depending on your commitment to the truth. If I get you to believe P, some proposition, is true, then that'll change your behavior, right?
Yeah.
Now, but I can't do that with myself. I can't say, hey, believe that P is true when it's not true, because I know it's not true.
Yeah.
And believing isn't an action. Like people, like we're misled. We like when people believe, you can't. Like pick a belief you'd like to have.
Right.
Everybody loves you. Try it. Try and believe it. You can't. You just can't make. You can hope for it. You can wish for it. You can imagine it. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
You can't lie to yourself. Okay. But, and this is what Frankfurt argued: bullshitting is not lying. It's very different from lying. See, the liar depends on your commitment to the truth. The bullshit artist is trying to get you to be indifferent to whether or not something is true. That's a very different thing.
I see. Yeah.
So we're motivated by two aspects of the meaning of things. One is it true? But another is, how salient is it? Your brain is really, like I clap my hands, you zero in on it, right?
Right.
So the salience of information is really, really catchy. So what you do in bullshitting is you get people to not care whether or not it's true, because they're getting caught up in how catchy it is, how interesting it is, how salient it is.
Oh, yeah. Could be romantic.
Well, and more. I mean, and so, think about advertising. Advertising is prototypical bullshit.
Yeah.
You watch this commercial. Here's these people in a bar. This guy gets a beer. Beautiful women come around, well-dressed people. Go into a bar sometime. Come on. That's not what it's like, right?
Yeah.
You know that's not what it's like. We know this isn't true. They know we know it's not true. But you know what? You buy the beer.
Yeah, you kind of suspend that for a minute and get really into it.
Right, exactly. So, self-deception isn't lying to yourself. It's basically using the way attention can bullshit. You can use attention to bullshit yourself. Here's why. You can direct your attention, like look at my finger, right? But your attention can also be caught. So attention has, we have cognitive science, we talk about this bottom up, it can be caught, and top down, you can direct it. So you can, when you direct your attention, you make something salient, and then that makes it more likely to catch your attention again. And then it's more salient, and then I can get into this vicious
So that's
cycle.
the pattern and thing. Yeah.
Yes. And then I get locked, and that's how I get drawn into self-deception.
Interesting. So it's like a pattern of bullshit, a cycle that you repeat, and it becomes easy. Yeah, and that's something else that it seems like psychedelics are can be very useful for people is resetting some of these patterns.
That's right.
There's a good metaphor I heard not too long ago that I really liked, and it was like if you take a sled and go down a snowy hill, the first time you go down that hill, it's gonna be kind of forceful to push down through the puffy snow. But the second time you go down, if you go down that same pathway, you just slide right down there. And if you try to go down a different way, you might end up just falling into that same path again.
Right, you're losing cognitive flexibility. That's what we're talking about. And cognitive flexibility is exactly to the ability to jump out. And what psychedelics can do is they can increase the cognitive flexibility. They can even just introduce sort of noise into the system. And what that does is just open up. It pushes you off the trodden pathway and gets your brain to explore possibilities. Now, there's a double-edged sword with this, right? I mean, so because the psychedelics, as you said, because they can reset your salience landscape, and this is, again, why the 3 S's are so important: setting, right, and spirituality. They also can also launch you into your own personal kind of salience bullshitting. So that's why, for example, and there's a constant emphasis, which the media hasn't quite picked up on. I'm not accusing you of anything, but that when you go to these conferences, which I do, and you speak at them, which I do, right? There's a constant emphasis. No, it's the psychedelics and the therapy together. Right? Or it's the psychedelics and the spiritual practices together. Because this on its own, it's like we were talking about earlier, if you're trapped in the meaning crisis in your own autodidactic pursuit of wisdom, you can get caught up in some crazy
Yeah, this is something I have talked about with people on the podcast, especially people who are proponents of a lot of like really going into the psychedelic stuff, where just delusion is a danger, and delusion
So,
is something to be very aware of and skeptical of when you're having some of these really heightened visions and things.
so I think the connections goes both ways. Not only do you need sort of spirituality for wisdom, I think you should also be cultivating wisdom for your spirituality.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, my official position on this, and so now I'm speaking as a citizen,
Mm-hmm.
not speaking as a representative of the
Okay.
product,
Yeah.
right? I disagree with the prohibition of substances
Mm.
because the evidence is overwhelming that it doesn't work. It has no effect on addictions. Psychedelics have a very, very low a chance of being addictive anyway.
Yes. Yes.
And all we do is shovel money into organized crime,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm also opposed to treating psychedelic substances as toys, as
Yeah.
recreational
Yeah.
devices, tools, right? Chainsaws are great things, right? You need a chainsaw. There, yeah, yeah. You know what? You don't play with chainsaws. You don't give
Oh,
a
yes.
chainsaw to a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like that's and many people, like I said, Mark Halpern has recently argued that what we should be considering as we're starting to legalize things, marijuana, for example, right, is what we do with other things. That people should have to go through a good educational program and get
Yes. Yes.
certified for using these things.
I really do agree with that. I think I've compared it to maybe like getting like a driver's license or something, where it's
Yes,
like it's a
exactly.
responsibility. They can be very dangerous, and you shouldn't
Yes,
just go use them at a party. That's not really a good use of them. They can be very, very helpful and beneficial, but there's responsibility to not be an idiot
yes,
when using them.
yes,
And that people
yes.
training is not a bad thing. People getting educated and trained on how to use them would be amazing. That would be a great way to introduce them to our cultures.
Right, and that has the potential to spiral up, right? Because if people get training, then they're probably going to get like sapiential, like insights,
Mm.
right? Existential breakthroughs,
Right.
and then the community has the capacity to bootstrap itself up
Hmm.
once we situate the use of psychedelics within this kind of project.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the future now because of marijuana being legal, just how
Sure.
that could trickle into people viewing these things in a different way. Because there are a lot of people out there who, if something is illegal, that's just a wall for them that just, no, it's illegal, it's bad, I don't want to mess with that.
So it's important to, I mean, to pay attention to the history of that, because as long as people were making arguments about rights or legal arguments, there was no headway. People, no,
Ah,
no, no. But
yeah,
when you started to say, "Hey, look, we can use this for medical purposes
yeah.
and to help people," then people went, "Oh, okay." And that's the same kind of argument I think
True.
we should be making for psychedelics. Not, it's my right. Nobody's going to
Yeah,
do anything, right?
it's
But if we
true.
say, "Hey, look, we can help people with post-traumatic stress disorder. We can help people with treatment-resistant depression. We can help people, right, that have treatment-resistant addiction. We can help people with existential crisis. We can help people in the cultivation of wisdom and meaning."
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's how you're going to do it.
That does seem like the way it's gonna go. And I've made that argument, the other argument, lots of times where I've said to
Yes.
people, it's my goddamn right to use this thing. You can't tell me what to do in my home. It seems ridiculous. And I think that is a legitimate thing, but it's not what people respond to. People go,
Exactly.
you're just a young person who's, head in the
Yeah.
clouds.
I'm not saying that's not a legitimate argument. I'm saying it's an ineffective argument.
It seems like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So my other concern is, right, I like when marijuana could go the alcohol route, and what I mean
Mm.
by that historically is marijuana and my my girlfriend's brother was making this point, excellent point at dinner the other day, right? Right. The one thing is, these drugs can also be used to reduce, social discontent, take people away. Aldous Huxley's worry about soma, right? And so I don't want. I'm going to put this in a slogan. I don't want these substances in the hands of corporations because I'm pretty damn sure care about all the stuff we've been talking about here.
Right.
What they want is to learn how to keep me from being a political threat and keep me interested in, my allegiance to the market, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And so, like legalization, important, but there's got to be a more positive program other than it not being illegal. Because if we don't, the market will come in and say, "Oh, we're going to tell you how this is to be understood and how it's going
How
to
to
be
use
used."
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what it seems like. Like that education piece is a really important thing. And I think I'm perhaps more just optimistic in general about these things, like just them
you're younger than me.
people figuring out like how to correctly use this stuff, like how to use it in a good beneficial way, and that information like will spread, because it can, like it can be so powerful for people. It can help with arthritis and just all this stuff, and people can get into yoga with marijuana and all these things that are like very, you know, natural to get into in a way. Like it kind
Yes,
of goes hand in hand a bit.
yes, it does. And there's days when I'm optimistic as well. I mean, I'm optimistic that Sorry, I don't mean this to sound self-aggrandizing. I'm trying to use it as evidence that people, like the amount of interest, like when I'm talking about the meaning crisis, and when I'm talking about meaning, and I'm talking about self-transcendence, and I'm talking about these higher states of consciousness, the amount of interest is just growing, and I find that very, very encouraging.
Yeah, that people are gravitating toward these ideas now, these ways of thinking. And when we're
Yeah.
talking about like corporation, like being worried about corporations controlling how we're consuming and viewing things like marijuana, it's one of the things we're kind of saying with that is like corporations aren't operating from a point of wisdom and meaning.
Exactly.
They're operating from like money, you know, corporate greed, really, which is the capitalism game, but it's not. It's not. What do you say?
I mean, yeah. I mean, this isn't the place to get into sort of a big discussion about capitalism. I mean,
Yeah.
the market does certain things. It distributes resources in a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I don't think corporations are organized as entities towards wisdom. I mean, when people have done psychological profiling on corporations, they most often come out having the same profile as psychopaths.
That's interesting. That's funny. Yeah, I can see that.
So, right, and it may be that they're performing some function. Again, I'm not an economist.
Yeah, and that's something I too like. I think I used to be when I was a little younger. I used to be way more anti-capitalism and anti-thing, and now I understand. Say corporations are simply winning the game. Like big corporations, they're just playing the game that's there, and it's not a bad game. But I think when we're talking about wisdom, it's like we want to have enough wisdom to limit their power in a way, and their effect on our communities, that we don't want them guiding us. You know, they're there for a certain purpose.
Yeah. See, we used to have other forces at work in our society. We used to have church and state as things that were counterbalances to, right, the market. But the church has withered, right, and the state has largely been gobbled up. And so we've lost things that counterbalance. And go ahead.
That's something like we were talking about earlier. Maybe we could touch on again, is that idea that we've sort of, people are so anti-religion now that we've lost that balance there, because religion was a way to provide a bunch of wisdom. It like, in the Bible and things like that, there's a lot of wisdom in there as far as how to live a good life, how to be a good person, how to live well. And a lot of that is like long-term thinking, right? Like how to get along with a community long-term and not just short-term. Yeah.
And not just the community, with the environment, with the world as well.
Yeah.
Right?
The world around you.
I think why there's a lot of interest, and I teach a course on this at U of T on Buddhism right now, is for a couple of the reasons we're touching on. One, it's outside of the history, so it doesn't have all of the historical baggage, right? And it gives much more direct sort of advice on how to cultivate psychotechnologies like mindfulness, meditation, contemplation, right? And so that's why there is this attraction, because people are trying to find that counterbalancing that you were mentioning, something, and the communities that can act as a counterbalance. They don't want to get rid of the market. They're usually not communists or anarchists, but they want some kind of counterbalance. They want something other than its one-dimensional presentation of everything.
This idea that how I've thought about it is just that there's got to be, there's a hierarchy of meaning, what's meaningful in your life, And right now, it just seems like the way we've been operating is with money at the top of that hierarchy. And
Yeah.
that's just a bad aim at the top. That can be in there, maybe number 5 on the list, but it shouldn't be the top aim of everything. And that's creating problems.
And you know what? You're right, because when we do research on this, right, money is not the thing that most powerfully contributes to people's sense of how meaningful or good their lives are.
Right.
Like when you're in poverty, then money's like really important.
Yeah.
Once you're out of poverty, right? Once you're out of poverty, right? The thing that matters are those connections.
Yeah.
People say meaningful relationships to other people, to God, to reality, to causes, being connected to something bigger than yourself, other than yourself. This is what, and that helps you make sense of everything. That's what ultimately makes your life meaningful.
Right. That's what deep down is driving people and driving your aims in life. Yeah.
But you see,
but it can get mixed up with money too.
Well, because the market, there's a way in which we can get, and Eric Fromm talked about this, right? The market can do this kind of, like advertising can do this kind of bullshitting on us. Like Fromm distinguished between having needs and being needs. Having needs are needs that you meet by having something like water, food. You have to consume it. You have to control it and consume it. But then there's also being needs. These are needs that are met by becoming something, transforming yourself. You need to become mature. You need to be in love.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you use different, and they're both legitimate, and you use different ways of thinking and relating to. Over here, when in the having one, I'm trying to control and consume. But over here, I'm trying to understand and relate and connect to. Right? Yeah. Here's what the market says. Well, you want to be in love? Have sex. Oh, you want to be mature? Have a car.
Yeah.
And so
that's
is
that kind of bullshit.
Exactly. And one of the things that I'm interested in these states of consciousness, altered states of consciousness, is often what it can do is it can reawaken in people. They can remember, not in like as a memory, but recover, be able to relive that being mode. They've often been trapped over here in the having mode, and they can sort of, and they can wake up and remember. The word that's translated as mindfulness, we're in the mindfulness revolution, which is also part of everything we're talking about right now, right? But the word sati doesn't actually mean, like, it literally means to remember. It's this deep kind of recovery of you get back into the being mode. Can you get back into the mode that's appropriate for making meaning as opposed to consuming things?
Yeah, that's interesting. And maybe we could talk a little bit, because you mentioned mindfulness before and related to being able to help people. And I have talked about mindfulness on this podcast, and I'm sure a lot of my listeners are familiar with what that is, but maybe you can talk about why that approach is helpful for people in this way too.
So what I'm really interested in is, so I just published something with Leo Ferraro in 2016 on really trying to get clear about a particular feature of mindfulness. How is it that mindfulness can facilitate insight and reduce self-deception? And so what matters, I think, is the kind of training. So let me quickly try to. You have a couple ways your attention structures your awareness. So you can pay attention to the whole picture, or you can zero in down on the features. Like, so the letters of a word versus the word itself. Now the thing is, you don't do that. Like, you don't. Many people say, "Oh, I start with the letters and go up to the word." Right? No. You're simultaneously going up from the letters to the word and down from the word to the letters, because you get a sense of the whole, and you use that to disambiguate the letters, and then the letter and it's doing that. So your attention's also doing something else. You can go from, like, you decide sort of where you're stopping and how far in or how far out you're paying attention. So what do I mean by that? See, here's my phone. I'm touching my phone, right? And so right now I'm aware through my fingers of my phone. But what I could do is I can shift my awareness, so now I'm aware of my fingers rather than, instead of being aware through my fingers of my phone, I'm aware of my fingers. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Okay, so remember how we were talking how you're framing problems, and you can frame them inappropriately, you get locked? Think of my glasses like how I'm framing my problem. Normally I'm looking through my framing. I'm not looking at it. But what mindfulness can help me do is to step back and look at my problem.
Interesting.
where,
Yeah.
oh, wait, that's distorting how I'm looking at things. Do you see that?
Right. Yeah.
And then it can help me also when I put my glasses back on to look differently through them.
Mm.
So what mindfulness does is train you in those two directions of attentional, transformation, so you can become much more aware of the meaning you're making and extracting from the environment.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. You're becoming just aware of your perspective, of your perception
Yeah,
of what you're seeing or what you're looking at.
yeah, the machinery that's making and projecting. And you see, and a perspective is not something just out there, right? You also, like, people talk about, and the word even means like you throw it out, like you project, but you don't just project, right? Like when you project a salience landscape or a perspective, you also are unfolding yourself into it, right?
Yeah.
You participate in it because your perspective also includes how you are fitting into the perspective.
Right. It reminds me of one of the most recent podcasts I released was with a man named Danny in the UK, and he studied things like autism and things. And we were talking about how if someone's more autistic, they might not be able to look at that broader picture simultaneously. They might see they might see the letters in a word first, and they can't really help it.
There's increasing argument and evidence that we're all on a continuum where one end is, right, we're very sort of, right, which is, autism is a spectrum. There's a lot of different groups.
Yeah.
One major subgroup is like that, like your friend was discussing, right? You're locked at this featural level. You're locked at the level of the letters, and you can't get up to the bigger picture, right? And it's harder for you to have what's called, Leighton calls ontological depth perception. It's harder for you to sort of see into people's mental states, for example, right? And then at the other end is psychosis, where everything is connected.
Yeah.
You're seeing meaning and patterns everywhere where there aren't, right?
Right.
And so both extremes, right? And what you want to do is you want to find, and it's not like that being in the middle is, right? Right? You want optimization. You want to be able, again, cognitive flexibility to move around as needed on that continuum.
Right. That's kind of what I like these days. If I view sort of like the meaning of life or how to live, it seems like the best way to do that is I call it like the dance. Like you're just kind of dancing between these extremes, say, but you're trying to be in the middle, but back and forth, and you're one foot in the other, and kind of that's how you.
This is the whole thing. I mean, and this is, as a cognitive scientist, this is where it overlaps with the stuff I do with artificial intelligence and machine learning. Because again and again, the crucial thing is what are called optimization processes, which is, right, you're often engaged in these trade-off relationships between different goals, and you don't want to maximize X because you'll lose too much on Y, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to get. Right, but it's not just get the average or the mean,
right?
Because sometimes you need more of Y than X, and sometimes you need more. So you're trying to get this fluid, dynamic, self-organizing optimization going at all times.
And that sound like that's where something like the one of these psychedelic experiences might come into play, where it can be really useful once in a while to go to get under one of these substances like psilocybin, and then have your mind open up and become more broad and open, and have these ideas kind of flowing through you, and being able to look outside your own perspectives a bit. And
Well, and so that's definitely a part of it. And then something I mentioned I come back to. So when you have like neural networks and other things, and you're trying to get them to optimize, you'll train them up for a while, and then what you'll do is you'll sort of throw noise into them. You'll shut off half of the nodes, or right, you'll put in random information, and it's like, why? Like, why are you doing this disruptive thing? The reason for that is if you just let the network run, it'll overfit to the data. It'll get too tightly fitted to the data sample, and it won't be able to generalize because it's too much like that sled in the path. Right? It's tightly fitting the data it's given. So you throw in some noise so that it will open up, and that actually allows it to generalize better. It will actually learn stuff that will apply to many more context other than the context in which it just learned something.
So are you talking about like you're talking about our brain sort of neural pathways and things there, and you're talking about our brain doing that naturally?
Yes.
On purpose.
So you do it naturally. You do it naturally all the time. So you do all kinds of disruptive strategies in order to try and produce insight. So, for example, if you're locked into one of these problems, right, you can't solve it. A good strategy is to sort of moderately distract yourself from the problem.
Yeah.
Introduce enough noise and variation, and then when you come back, you can often break out of the frame.
That's interesting. That's something I was thinking about the other day. I've learned recently that part of my personality is I'm a very open individual, very open to ideas and things, and I'm sort of, you could say, a creative type of person. And so one of the things I've realized that I've done throughout my life is to be honest, in some ways, abuse some substances. And I think part of the reason I've gravitated toward that is it puts me in this state. I like to get high and broaden my horizon, and then I like to try to bring that back somehow. Bring that craziness into something in the world, concrete, and share something.
So there again, two things on there. I mean, openness is motivated cognitive flexibility. So you are motivated to seek out cognitive flexibility.
Right.
So that ends up. The other thing is, I mean, that bringing it back is also part again of this wisdom stuff, right? We trained these skills of attention that reduce getting fixated, reduce your bullshitting of yourself, allow you right to step back and look at your own cognition, right? You need all of that in place.
So
I'm really interested, in fact, like when people. So normally when we have an altered state of consciousness, let's say a prototypical dreaming. Okay. We all dream.
Yeah.
And we're in the dream, we think it's real, and then when we wake up, prototypically we go, "Oh, that wasn't real. This is real."
Yeah.
Right? Or I was drunk. Oh well, that wasn't real because I was drunk, right? And a lot of psychedelic experiences are like that, Oh well, but some, and these are the ones I'm really interested in right now. People go into these states, they're a mystical state, a kind of a particular kind, and they'll come back and say that was really real, and this is an illusion, right?
Yeah.
And that's really interesting because that's also at the core of a lot of the world religions, right? So I've had enlightenment and I've seen nirvana, and nirvana is real, and this is samsara, this is an illusion. Or I've been practicing Tai Chi and I've experienced the Tao, and that's the really real. Or I've been Plato, like I've come out of the cave and I've seen the really real. That's what Plato calls it, and I really. All of this is just.
But why though? Like, why do they feel that? Why do they feel that that's more real? Like, where does that come from?
That's the problem. Okay, so let's make it even more of a problem before we try and tackle it, because that's what's exciting, right? Yeah. So the typical answer of how we judge realness, and in fact this even goes back to Plato, is the idea of intelligibility. Intelligibility is just a big word for saying how well things make sense to us, how well our intelligence can latch onto them, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea is, the reason why I think this is more real than the dream is this gives me a much more coherent, much more comprehensive, intelligibility. Many more things make sense to me. And that dream thing doesn't fit into this big picture.
Right.
Okay? Now, what's weird about these higher states of consciousness is they don't cohere with everyday experience, because they in fact challenge all of this.
Yeah.
They're temporary. People often can't put in any content to them. They're ineffable. And yet they say, instead of saying, I reject it because it doesn't cohere, they say, I reject all that other stuff.
Right. Because that feeling, whatever that feeling is so strong, I guess. It's just so strong.
So I presented here at a conference here on this, and then I went down. I was very privileged to give a guest lecture at a course at Yale by Lori Paul. Lori Paul is a brilliant philosopher. I recommend her highly to your readers. She literally wrote the book on transformative experience called Transformative Experience. And so she was teaching a course on there, and I went down and talked to them. I think, this is I can't give the complete answer. I'm not trying to be coy. I mean, it's a long answer. I'll try and give the gist, but I mean, the video will be up soon. And if you want, I can send a link for your viewers.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to be respectful for your audience. I don't mean to trespass on their trust, but there's sort of three levels. I mean, what we want sort of two things. We want a good descriptive theory. We want a theory that explains why these higher states of consciousness have the features they do, the feeling, as you say, where feeling means the whole sort of experiential field, right? Yeah. But we also want like a prescriptive theory. We want to know why this theory provide good justification for all the changes that people make. Because we have, is it Yaden? Yeah, he did work in 2017. When people make these huge quantum changes, there's also a book called Quantum Change Theory on them.
Mm.
It's a pretty good psychological theory. When people make these changes, they almost do. They very reliably improve their lives. Their
Right.
health gets better. So they're being guided in some way that
Right.
is
Yeah.
working.
Yeah. There's like a wisdom there.
Yes. So exactly. So the thing is, first of all, can I come up with an account of the brain processes, the psychological processes, the information processes that explain why it has these features that it does, and can I then explain? Can I give an account that justifies and explains why there's a kind of wisdom in it? And you want those two explanations to fit together, right? You want my account of the machinery and the account of the wisdom to jive really nicely together, and that's what I'm really working on right now.
You know what that sounds like to me is a very, very hard thing to do. That's not going to be an easy way to.
Well, see, that's where my training as a cognitive scientist helps, right? Because I'm trained to talk about things at the psychological level, the machine learning level, the brain level, and also to do the philosophical work. That's where training as a cognitive scientist. This is really a problem. Sorry, that sounded too imperialistic. This is a problem that's particularly good for cognitive scientists.
Yeah, because it takes in a lot of things into consideration, not just limiting it. I mean, one thing I think is worth pointing out is something I was talking about recently with someone is talking about what science can study and what feel, and that science can't actually tell us how we feel. But some people are so ingrained into the science dogma, say, because they're so anti-religion, they've found themselves, this is what I can trust. I can trust science. Science will explain things through fact and things. But so as a good example, I think, is that science cannot tell you how angry you are. It can't. It can measure heart rate and blood pressure and how much you're sweating and things. But we all know what it is to be angry, that it's just because science cannot tell us, it still exists because we all feel, we know what it is to be locked in anger and just, if want to bring everyone into it and all that. So in that sense, it's helpful to look at some of these psychedelic experiences or these peak mystical experiences, and they're real, but just because we cannot look at them under a microscope doesn't mean they're totally an illusion or totally delusional.
Totally.
They're still there.
So I have two important things to say. Oh, sorry, two things to say what you said was important. That's what I meant.
Okay, yeah.
That sounded really self-promotional. I apologize for that. Okay, so one is, first of all, you've put your finger on something that I want to talk about, and it's part of the answer to that problem I was proposing, namely that we need to open up and consider that there are many kinds of knowing.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that mainly, but then I'll just briefly talk about the second point. You see, what a cognitive scientist can do is give you a theory that tells you how the brain, in interacting with its environment, can realize what's relevant or important. But it can't give you a theory of the things that are relevant or important. Let me give you an analogy. Okay? Darwin's theory of evolution explains to me the mechanisms by which organisms evolve. But it can't tell me predictively what organisms are going to turn out to be.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a little slow. It can't be future. It can be in the past a bit.
Well, it's not only that. It's that the theory tells me the mechanisms, but it doesn't. But it tells me that those mechanisms are always working in conjunction to an ever-changing environment. See, the fittedness of a creature isn't in the creature; it's in the relationship between the creature and the environment. And so, Darwin's theory tells me how that relationship works, right? But it doesn't tell me, right, what particular creatures are going to show up in the future. Because, an asteroid hits the Earth.
Yeah, right. Because of the environment, that chaos variability there.
Yeah. All that sort of stuff.
Right.
So I think, that the processes by which people realize what's relevant, those are universal and we can understand them. But what people find relevant or important in their environment, in their lives, there can't be a scientific theory of that. There's a big, right? Does that make sense?
Because it's just too complicated?
It's not only too complicated, it's because, look, when I want to study something scientifically, I have to find a class. I have to be able to group things because I'm making inferences not about a single thing, right? I'm a scientist. I'm trying to generalize as many different things as possible. So I have to find something that all these individuals share in common.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so pay attention to the difference here. every human being everywhere, it's universal. We're trying to figure out what's relevant, what's important, exclude what's irrelevant. So that's universal.
Yeah.
Right? But take a look at the things we find relevant or important. Are they universal? No way. There's nothing they share. Like, you can find a rock relevant. You can find another. Like, it goes all over and something you found relevant. Have you ever looked at a picture of somebody you were in love with 20 years ago and you go, "Wow, what did I see in that person?" They were once the center of your life, and now they're not relevant anymore.
Things change, and it goes back to that idea: if someone's poor, they're going to find so much meaning in earning money. If someone has a lot of money, that their environment's way different, and they're not going to find that same meaning there.
Excellent, Carl. That's exactly the point.
Right.
Now let's go to the other point. You talked about different kinds of knowing. That's what you're using with your anger example. And this is stuff I do a lot of work on, and it jives with L.A. Paul's work, right, on transformative experience. So the one that our culture is fixated on is propositional knowing. This is knowing by putting things into propositions. Propositions are statements that can be true or false, and you believe them or don't believe. Like the Earth is round. That's a proposition.
Okay,
And science's job, and it's a good job, and I'd like to be a scientist, so I'm not dissing science, right? I love being a scientist. But science's job is to produce theories. Basically inferential machines for generating powerfully coherent sets of propositions.
Right.
And that's what a fact is, right? You give all these facts.
Yeah.
But that's knowing that the Earth is round, knowing that it circles the sun. Well, actually, orbits the sun, doesn't circle the sun.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, that's very different from another kind of knowing. You know, for example, how to catch a ball. Knowing how to catch a ball is very different from having a bunch of beliefs about it. You can believe everything you want about swimming, and that's not the same thing as knowing how to swim.
Yeah.
Skills are not the same as beliefs. Now, here's the really interesting thing. Insight is more a matter of skill than belief. Remember, have you ever seen that 9-dot problem where you have 9 dots and you have to join it with 4 straight lines? It's a classic problem. It's where think outside the box.
I think I have seen it, maybe in one of your talks, actually.
Yeah. So the thing is, if you say to people, think outside the box or go outside the box, it doesn't help them. Because knowing that they should go outside the box is not the same thing as knowing how to go outside the box.
Right. In
right?
what way? Yeah.
Okay, so propositional knowledge, procedural knowing. Okay, next, perspectival knowing. This is knowing what it's like. Like you said it a minute ago, knowing what it's like to be angry. What kind of salience landscape do I have? What things are standing out for me? What things are, right? That's a very different kind of knowing what it's like. And then there's participatory knowing. This is the knowing this is the way you know your culture. You know it by participating in it. You are making it, but you're also being made by it. You're deeply involved and identified with it. The Greeks actually had 4 different terms. They had episteme. That's where you get epistemology from, for that propositional knowing. They had techne for knowing how. They had noesis for this perspectival knowing. It's the kind of knowing you use when you say, notice this.
Right.
And then the last one is gnosis, this kind of knowing that's by identifying with, loving, being coupled to someone. It's how you know your significant other. And
that last one really, to me, it sounds like something that you can demonstrate your knowing by action, but it might be very hard to articulate that knowing, like the rules of a game, of a very complicated game or something.
In fact, I would say your point is stronger than you stated. I think when you try to put these 3, the procedural, the perspectival, and the participatory into language, it's very, very hard to do.
Right.
You ask somebody, do you know how to ride a bike? Yeah. Okay, put it into words. What do you do to ride a bike?
Okay, you balance your core, you push forward. There's like a lot going on.
Yeah, and that exactly. And then, okay, put into words what it's like to be angry or what it's like to taste ice cream.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that doesn't mean those things don't exist. Those are real forms of knowing things.
Right. Or can you put in what it's like to have been in love with Sally? The kind of person you were, the kind of world it was.
Yeah. You might have to write a whole book or something.
Well, that's what literature tries to do.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And then these psychedelic experiences are really in that, where people just are constantly finding it so difficult to put these into words that they just find that they can't. We don't have the right words, or maybe there is no right word.
Well, but I see that, and I think to go back to the problem I was setting earlier, I think that's part of the issue. These things, I pay very, sorry, I don't mean this to sound hard. I don't pay very much attention to the propositions people talk about when they come out of these higher states of consciousness, because the propositions go all over the place.
Yeah.
People will come out of this and say, I know there's a God. People will come and say, I know there's no God, right? It's really both.
Yep,
They'll say both. And so the propositions. So I don't think, right, that that's where we should be paying attention. I think that what's being improved in these higher states of consciousness is that procedural knowing, that perspective knowing, that participatory knowing. And see, wisdom is about those things.
Right. It's about how we're guiding our lives and how we're actually choosing to live. And that you look at what people are actually doing with their lives in the years, say, after these experiences, and how they're changing things. That's how you know what they've learned.
It's what people, it's like, it's the kind of person they want to be. It's how they make sense of the world, how they're caring about it, how they're involving themselves in it, what kind of normative demands they feel are in place and relevant to. It's this very sophisticated, complex web.
Yeah. So talking about stuff like this, it's like it's so, I find it so inspiring and exciting to talk about these ideas and how these things are so useful. But then we go back to how these psychedelics are illegal in our culture to use. And, you know, you mentioned before that when trying to get approval to do some of these studies, even now when a lot of these studies have been done and are showing very promising results, even now you're finding sort of in your university and things that people are very hesitant to give the go-ahead, that you're finding a lot of issues with that.
And people caution. I've had people who I deeply respect, by the way. So this is not meant in any way to be aggressive. But people cautioning me, say, should you be talking about this stuff right now? Right. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's so relevant to everything else I'm doing. And it has such tremendous potential to help the mental health crisis and be a significant tool in addressing the meaning crisis. And those crises are deeply interwoven. There's a reason why suicide is increasing. Some of it's socioeconomic, but also a lot of it has to do with the meaning crisis in our world, right? And so, it's the moral responsibility is too great.
Yeah, you're finding it's just leading, like your other work is leading you to this other stuff.
Totally. And I think in a way that's totally rationally justifiable. I've been trying to give, or at least indicate where arguments are possible, right? There's mounting, and you've read some of it too, there's mounting experimental evidence. I mean, these conferences are growing in number and influence and prestige and quality and caliber.
But people are still fearful, right? It comes from a fearful place of putting something out there that may receive backlash, social stigma. People with powerful positions may end up getting called out, and they feel like they're going to lose their position or something if they give a green light to something controversial.
There's definitely that. There's the fact that we're also the victims of history. I mean, so typically, cross-culturally, cross-historically, psychedelics, because they were usually enfolded within a wisdom tradition, a sapiential tradition, a spiritual tradition, they were pro-social. People used psychedelics as a way of coming back with insight and transight and enhanced mindsight to help, right? And what happened in the 60s, right, was that the psychedelics associated with, a counterculture, antisocial, tune in, drop out. Leary did a lot of damage.
I know, right?
Yeah. And so we got this weird aberration, historical, cultural aberration, where psychedelics got associated, right, with antisocial behavior in a deep, deep way.
Yeah. I'll say one thing on that. Just, you know what? I feel like Leary gets such a bad rap, and I feel so bad for the guy. I've read some of his work on in the psychotherapy kind of realm and he really had a lot of great things and great ideas there. But it was that removal from society that became a problem, that dropout idea, and I really understand how people come to those conclusions under these influences too, because you see all that bullshit we were talking about before. You see all this bullshit and you go, it's all hypocritical bullshit. I don't want any part of that. But the sort of maybe an extra, beyond that, another piece of wisdom is well, how can I bring this into the culture without war, without,
That's right.
Bring it in peacefully and have a change and allow these other ideas in.
And you heard me mention set and setting. That's Leary, right?
Right.
And so, yes, I mean, I was making a criticism of that part of his
Yeah,
program.
for sure. And that culture turned a lot of people off, and that's
It did.
definitely true.
And I mean, and people saw it ending up in Charles Manson.
Right.
Whether that's a legitimate connection, that's the optics.
Yeah.
That's what was seen.
Yeah.
Right. And then secondly, we have a long, I mean, North America especially, right? Founded by Puritans. We have a puritanical, you do research and you ask people, here's this drug, purported drug, and if I give it to the people, that'll cure them of this disease, but they'll also have massive, wonderful feelings of euphoria. Should they be allowed to take the drug? And people say, no.
Yeah, right.
Oh, we've improved the drug and it's removed the euphoria. Can they take it now? Oh yeah, that's
right.
fine.
Yeah,
people don't want, right? They don't want, because there's this Protestant puritanical fear of
there is
unearned ecstasy, right?
Yes.
Because, right, like you said, like we were talking about, both of us, sorry, like that used to be the purview of religion, altered states of consciousness. That used to be, that was the
mysticism and things. Yeah, that is really funny, and that's something that I've people do have that thought for sure. And then what's exciting to me, and as part of the work that I'm doing right now, is working with a lot of young people, a lot of teenagers, young people who have a lot of issues in their lives. And what's fun, and you talk to them about going to counselors and stuff, they're like, yeah, I'll go see a fucking counselor, whatever. But if you're imagine just that excitement piece of how these psychedelics can help people is sure. it brings excitement to psychotherapy. And that's that's kind of an amazing thought, to be excited about going into these states, because they can be fun too. And that's okay that they're fun,
I think they're more like, so I think they're on a continuum. So we talked about insight, and then work I just published this year with Leo Ferraro and Adrian Hera-Bennett on the flow experience. When people get into the, when you're in the zone and you're in this really intense thing, right? And it starts to have a lot of the aspects of mystical experience. People start to feel this tremendous at-one-ment. They have the sense, although they know they're exerting a lot of effort, it feels effortless. It's full of grace, right? Everything is super salient. There's this tremendous sense of connectedness and novelty. And so people seek the flow state out, and they should. Because the more often you get into the flow state, the more well-being you have, the more meaningful you find your life to be. And so I think the flow state is basically an insight cascade. So normally we have just one insight. But think about, one of my standard examples is rock climbing, right? You talk to people who rock climb, why do you rock climb? It sounds like a punishment from Greek mythology. You go up this rock, right? And you're hurting yourself, and it's dangerous, and you might fall and hurt yourself really badly. And then once you get to the top, you come back down.
What's the point?
Talk to people, they do it because they get into the flow state. I get into the flow state when I'm lecturing. I do Tai Chi because it gets me into the flow state. Because when you're rock climbing, right, you can misframe and you literally impasse. You got to do restructuring, and not just a little restructuring. You got to do this big restructuring of your whole body and your perspective to get to out of that locking, and then to another place where you need to get another insight. And you see what I mean? You get it's like you get a aha moment strung together. Yeah.
For me, that really brings me to why I play soccer. I play soccer here in the winter, and that's what I love. And what I love most in soccer is if we're losing, because I feel if we're losing, I'm allowed to just totally focus and go super intense and get into that flow state where I'm just putting all cylinders on go and just shutting off my brain and reacting in each moment. Just boom, 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 boom. These are the variables. Here we go. Get the ball. All this stuff, and it's going so fast. I'm no longer, that little ego mind consciousness thing is gone. It's not there anymore. Yeah.
Right. You start to get self-transcendent. Now imagine. So just like flow is sort of an insight cascade, Imagine if you weren't flowing in just soccer. Because the reason why you can flow in soccer is you have soccer expertise. And so you can go into a very high demand situation and you can push your skills to the limit, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
But what if you were not flowing on a particular skill of soccer, but what if you were flowing on your cognitive grip on reality?
That's well, and I think that's why sometimes I like to get really drunk and smoke pot or whatever, because I feel like it's a kind of a state of mind that I find appealing in that same way.
Yes. And so so you're doing disruptive strategies, exactly.
Yeah.
What if you're doing is flowing in that ability to not in soccer or this, but in your overall skill of realizing what's relevant, altering what's salient, altering your sense of identity, altering your sense of reality. What if you're flowing in that? Of course you would find that. And we know that intelligent organisms seek out altered states of consciousness. Caledonian crows that are wickedly smart, they'll make tools in one context, fly to another place to use it. They will pull down rooftops to make themselves dizzy.
No way.
They do it for fun. They do, but fun is fun. I don't like the word fun, not because I'm trying to.
It just diminishes it a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insufficient. It's something more profound than that.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. I mean, speaking about how smart those birds are, we have ravens. I live in the Yukon, and we have these huge ravens up here, and man, they are smart. And they're just their language. They have so much of a vocabulary. They can speak in so many different ways. It's actually amazing. Sometimes you'll be walking down the street, and these ravens above you are just like chattering away, and you're thinking, are they talking about me? You know, like it seems like they have that level of intelligence.
They do, and they're also social. And there seems to be important connections between how intelligent a species is and how social. Although there seems to be one exception: the octopus is highly intelligent, but it could be because it's having to deal with 8 appendages at once.
Interesting, but they're not social, is what you're saying. Octopuses don't operate in groups.
No. Although if you give them MDMA, they'll become much more social.
Interesting. Who did that? Is that like who was that guy? Was it the guy who invented the isolation tanks? Lilly. He used to be really into giving like dolphins LSD and things like that.
Well, I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to say there's a deep connection between being intelligent and seeking altered states of consciousness. I mean, that's why you go into an altered state of consciousness every night, right?
When you dream.
Your brain needs that. It's performing important functions. These functions of optimization, enhancing cognitive flexibility. Right?
Yeah. That makes sense. Like you're talking about before, it's not good for us to become way too limited in our thinking. So maybe that's I mean, that makes sense to me if that's the purpose of dreaming, maybe is just to let our brains just totally ease their restrictions and like, flow a bit.
So we know from some of the work that if you have REM sleep, you do dream in non-REM sleep. That's a bit of a cultural fable, but you have a especially kind of intense dream in REM sleep. So if you have REM sleeps, Wagner showed that will improve your ability to solve insight problems. And if you lucid dream, that will also increase your chance of solving insight problems.
Interesting. Yeah, coming back to problem solving.
Yeah.
Wow, man, there's a lot there. It's it's also fascinating and it's very exciting. It's like a new sort of frontier almost that we're getting into here.
I think so. We're in a race, right? We're in a race because the meaning crisis and the mental health crisis are interacting with the socioeconomic crisis and the environmental crisis, and we're in a race. And and the corporations are really interested in this stuff for reasons that aren't totally in our best interest. The military is definitely interested in all this work. I've been approached by a representative of the U.S. military. The U.S. military is trying to induce flow states, use transcranial direct current stimulation, use transcranial magnetic stimulation. Also, we're in a race. We're in a race. It's a race, and so it's fascinating and it's highly motivating. But I want to add one more motivator to that. We're in a race. There's urgency here. There's real urgency.
I feel like that too, and that's what, ever since I started doing this podcast, that was kind of part of the inspiration, was looking around me, seeing sort of the communities I've been in and how there are a lot of people suffering so much too, just that so much alcoholism, depression, people dealing with addiction issues and being on all these opiates and things, and then seeing how some of these very meaningful experiences with some of these psychedelics can actually help people so much. Totally. And it just feels like, let's get this going, or like, let's actually take some steps here, make some movement and some change here, because it could really change our communities a lot.
Yeah, change our communities. I mean, I talk about how it can change all four C's. It can change our cognition, our consciousness, our character, and our
Mm,
communities.
right.
And if we do all of that, we'll change our culture.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to do.
Yeah. It seems like it starts on that individual level as well. It starts with the
Sure.
individual and then trickles out from there.
Well, both. I mean, what we're doing now is also what we need to do. We need to
Mm,
create networks. There
mm,
have to be networks. Social networks are ultimately what change society.
hmm.
I agree with you. Individuals have to engage in these projects that we've been talking about, these practices. I'll
Mhm.
tell people, don't tell me what you believe. Tell me what
Yeah.
you're practicing. Tell me
Right.
what you're practicing.
Oh.
But we also need to network people together. More and more networking.
Hmm.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to come on this show.
Mm.
Like the more networking that can happen, the better.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Cool. Well, man, I don't know how long we've been talking, but it seems like it goes by pretty fast. We're in half a flow state right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. I don't know. Is there anything you want to promote right now? You said you're just working on a book and you have
Yeah.
a website or?
Yeah, but if I could send you the link and people could watch, they could go to my YouTube channel and
Mhm.
just see some of my talks. There's also a book. I can send you the link to the book I have. And that'd be great. I mean, part of that networking, I'm trying to get a lot more subscribers.
Mhm.
I'm going to be releasing in January an entire video series, right? So there's going to be 1 hour episodes going to be released weekly. And it's going to be like all of this work, all of
Cool.
my work in a unified argument, all about wisdom, alternate states of consciousness, the meaning crisis, all of it. And I've already filmed 10 of the videos. We're
Oh,
in
wow.
edit. So it's in process. It's going to be there. It's going to be available.
Cool. That sounds awesome. I'll definitely link to all that stuff. So wherever people are checking this out, check out the description to find those links.
Right.
Yeah, John, thanks so much for talking to me, man. This was awesome.
Carl, this has been excellent. You're an excellent interlocutor. I really, really enjoyed this a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.